Warning: this video contains spoilers about nothing really, perhaps about life itself. But did that notice about whether you had to skip to a certain moment in the video or remove it got to your nerves? It's natural. It's a reflection of the era we live in and the culture we're a part of. The spoiler culture. Welcome back to BitViews and prepare to not be spoiled. Hit it! Let's start with the basics. What is a spoiler? When you hear the word a spoiler, the immediate meaning that comes to your mind is that someone is going to tell you something of vital importance about the plot of a work or product that could ruin your experience because you didn't discover it by yourself. Motor enthusiasts associated with this part, which helps increase the stability and grip of the vehicle that has it. But have you ever thought about why this part is called a spoiler? It's because its purpose is to spoil the unfavorable air movements around the moving vehicle. In other words, to damage or reduce its quality or weight. And with that definition, you can already get an idea of where the term for telling or ruining parts of something that you're interested in comes from. A spoiler is not called that because it stands out like the piece used on vehicles, but rather because it's something that will ruin or damage or reduce the quality of something. One of the first uses of this word to refer to what we are discussing occurred in 1971, in the April's issue of National Lampoon, where Doug Keeney wrote an article titled Spoilers, in which he revealed the endings of several well-known movies. The basis of the article was to use spoiler as the term for surprise endings or unexpected twists in novels and movies. The modern world, in terms of content and its consumption, is divided into two types of people: those who have already seen something and those who haven't. The problem is that the line dividing those two groups is practically non-existent. In other words, before the convenience of on-demand content, everyone knew what happened in a series because it aired at the same time for everyone. And since the internet was not as popularized as it is today, it was much harder for information about what happened in a particular episode or movie to leak to other countries, especially if the original country had aired it first. The same goes for movies, especially when a TV channel had exclusive rights to broadcast it, or when a film premiered in your country. Here's an interesting difference. Have you ever wondered why series used to be so episodic in the past? Why is it said today that series like Rick and Morty, Steven Universe, and others are better as a series than those from 20 years ago? Most likely because now they have the freedom to have a consistent storyline over time, instead of being forced to reset the status quo at the end of each episode so that no matter when you cut that episode on TV, you can understand what's happening without feeling like you missed something. This is not a problem nowadays with streaming and on-demand content. A good example of this is The Good Place, where they actually play with the fact that you're expecting a episodic format because it's a sitcom, and they turn it upside down and, I'm not going to spoil that show. This is a good discussion about spoilers without spoilers. So there is that. Of course, today there are series that, either because of their style or simply because they don't want to put in much effort, like The Simpsons or Family Guy, have to constantly reset their status quo. And when you catch an episode where a character was already born and gone for the series, there is always a mental division in your head of, oh, these are the old episodes and these are the new ones, right? A good example of this format that I can remember from my youth, warning, old people's story ahead, is Rugrats or whatever you want to call it. You could really tell if the episode was new, new or actually new based on how many kids were in the episode. For example, if Susie was in the show, it was fairly new. If Deal was in the show, it was right after the movie. If Kimi was in the show, it was even later in the show. So based on the amount of kids, you could tell if the episode was new or not right away. And that was like a very bold choice by the creators because, I remember back in the day, like if you didn't see the movie, you were like, wait, he has a brother? So that's the kind of problem that we're dealing with here. Other series will start fresh and tell you the premise of the series in their opening, over and over again, even though this was often done to sell toys like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, G.I. Joe, Transformers, My Little Pony, the original one, etc. And precisely because the series is serialized, having someone spoiling the episode you missed the day before was often a blessing, as it was the only way that you will know what happened that day because you missed the episode, especially if by chance it was a series with narrative continuity. Missing an episode could only be resolved with proactive spoilers. Ironic, isn't it? It was either that or hunt for a rerun, and God knows that you had to go buy that TV guide and just wait for it. Then TiVo came in and we could actually record the shows, and that made it better. But movies, being an older medium that pursued its artistic aspirations long before the silver screen, often play all their cards in narrative or a plot twist when they want to tell a story or convey a sensation. And spoilers, even in that era, have always been a problem. After all, if it's a thriller, and while you're waiting to enter the cinema, someone leaving the theater is already discussing it and says, "Wow, can you believe that so-and-so was the killer?" It takes away some of the excitement from the story. This is why, as legend has it, movies like Clue from 1985 were sent to different theaters with different endings, where each one had a different character as the killer, emulating the game that inspired it, and increasing the confusion when people left the theater and discussed it with their friends. Even more so if the same theater had several versions and just rotated them between showings. It made the craziest conversations, apparently. Nowadays we have some examples of this, but sadly not as many as I would like. Something similar, although not necessarily related to avoiding spoilers, is when a movie or series changes the ending or a plot twist from the original material, usually a book. In the past, this was done for the market and for test audiences, such as changing the ending of I Am Legend, which had a much more philosophical ending that made us ponder human nature, but did not please the test audiences. Or the stronger and more original ending of Get Out, which didn't sit well with those audiences as well. But let's take a step back and think about what the world was like 20 or 30 years ago. When a movie was a must-see or a series was the series of the moment, it worked similarly to what we see today: word of mouth and mass consumption of the series. However, due to the now or never obligation of not being able to watch things on demand, it was harder for your circles not to be in the know. Either because they had also seen the work, or because, well, you were talking in person with people and you could tell by their faces or by their expressions if they actually seen whatever you're talking about or not before you spoil it for them. Today, it's much more challenging. You can write something on forums like Reddit or other social media platforms, and almost certainly, many of those reading it have not had the same experience as you, and not at the same time. It can even happen with this video. If you comment anything in here, you can just change someone's perception on whatever work of fiction they wanted to consume. This often leads to conflicts and clashes because what one person understands as a spoiler is not the same as what another person understands as a spoiler. Which brings us to another question. How much time must pass before we can openly discuss something without worrying about spoilers? And here is the reason why the difference in timing is relevant in this matter. In the past, the pace at which things were consumed was dictated by third parties. And perhaps, if you are lucky or had the means, along with the willingness of the company to release their products in that format, you may be able to enjoy something in a home video format. VHS, Betamax, RIP, DVD later down the road, etc. Something that became much more popular with the now defunct video rental store format. RIP Blockbuster, maybe, I guess? I don't know. Maybe I can make a video on that. It's for all people. However, when someone says that what happens in The Sixth Sense or the family tree in Star Wars is common knowledge, and that, of course, you can talk about them because everybody knows, it embraces the idea that those moments, these proto-memes, to call them that in some way, are part of popular culture. And therefore, not knowing them is unthinkable, almost like not knowing what McDonald's is, what a smartphone is, etc. However, I believe the best way to demystify this is with a harsh revelation. You are getting old. Not everyone has to know what happens in The Sixth Sense. Not everyone has to know the family tree in Star Wars. Just like not everyone in the modern world knows about the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, and don't be shocked when someone refers to Naruto Uzumaki as Boruto's father, or if someone hasn't seen Dragon Ball Z. Different times, different memes. Following the logic of Richard Dawkins when he coined this neologism, a meme is a theoretical unit of cultural information, transmissible from one individual to another, or from one mind to another, or from one generation to the next. The common knowledge of popular culture is exhausted as generations pass, and other things become more relevant to those taking the reins. An example of this? Final Fantasy VII Remake. Final Fantasy VII Remake was released in April 2020, and although it is a remake of Final Fantasy VII, a game from 1997, and thus more than 26 years ago, we are old, that's a fact, there was a lot of commotion when classic fans openly discussed what is probably the most well-known plot point of Final Fantasy VII, because of how shocking it was at the time. People complained about spoilers, while others said, but everyone knows it by now. Perhaps everyone who was old enough to play with a PlayStation in 1997, perhaps all of us who live and breathe this medium, but not the average person who became interested in this makeover of a game in 2020 and thought, will I now be able to understand why this classic is so acclaimed? Just for them to be spoiled by someone that just, played it 30 years ago. Just think that the original game was, at the time of the remake's release, 23 years old. In other words, it was old enough to drive and buy alcohol in most countries. The number of players who were born in the meantime is considerable. So really think twice before just assuming that everyone plays something that is 20 years old or more. Because that's not the case. Our perception of the world is our perception of the world. Just because I am old doesn't mean that everyone else had the same experiences in life as me or just watched or consumed the same stuff as me. Just because I like video games doesn't mean that everyone else likes video games. Maybe we all know what Call of Duty or FIFA is. Sorry, EAFC. But not everyone knows what Eternal Sonata is and what the ending of the game is. Not everyone knows why Cyberpunk was so hyped and why everyone was so delusioned by it when it released. Because, different tastes, different hobbies, different people. That's how it works. All of this brings us to the present. to the World Wide Web, that dance between being able to freely express yourself, as many companies benefit from not openly discussing their products, and respect for others. This, in theory, can be resolved by putting a spoiler warning before speaking, or choosing the group/community or thread in which you're going to talk about stuff. Is as easy as that. But I will suggest you try this experiment. When you have just watched a newly released episode or a recently premiered movie, do a post on one of your social networks. Say that you have just watched it. Like, hey, I just watched the new episode of XXX. And let's say that episode literally released an hour ago or something. You just watched it. And then count the seconds until someone comments, "No spoilers, please." This irrational fear of spoilers experienced a resurgence and gained more strength than ever in the 2010s. And many attribute that newfound fear in culture to the most popular series of recent years, Game of Thrones. Let me explain. When series like Lost, Prison Break, or Breaking Bad, icons of the new era of television series, regardless of whether you like them or not, were the trend, you will talk about them the next day at work, either because they aired on TV or because you watched them through other means. And if you were the one watching through other means, you were warned not to spoil anything for those who watched it dubbed or on their favorite TV channel or whatever. Game of Thrones, which premiered in 2011 and therefore marked the beginning of a decade of television cult around this series, was different. Because as cool as it was and as popular as it became, it was based on books that were already quite popular. As a result, the world was divided between those who followed the series on TV and those who had read the books, many of whom switched after the current season ended, not wanting to wait another year to continue. And well, there were also those who didn't care about Game of Thrones, and there were quite a few of them, and they were just trolls or something, whatever. In practical terms, this meant that the mainstream culture was experiencing what every anime fan has felt regarding those who read the manga, and that murky aura of someone potentially spoiling the story at any moment. So, for the first time ever, the mainstream was feeling what the otaku were feeling all this time. It was somewhat parallel to the popularization of being a geek. Let's not fool ourselves. During the Game of Thrones era, a lot of things became mainstream, and therefore being geek was a cool thing again. Game of Thrones was seen as this cool thing to do, this cool thing to watch, even if it had dragons and magic and all this. So the world was united, for a while at least, in the sense that everyone was a geek and everyone was suffering the same pain. You had the manga readers versus the anime watchers, and you had the book readers versus the series watchers. Anyone who watches anime based on manga knows the balance and the complicated relationship between those who read and those who watch the same product. The debate about quality, and especially the care that must be taken when talking to avoid revealing something that has already happened in the manga but not in the anime, like, for example, when the final super mega final episode of Attack on Titan or Shingeki no Kyojin was teased to be revealed, and then it became like final part 2, part 1, and it just dragged for years. People that read the manga already knew the end. Like, there was no surprises for them. They already knew. The last part of the first half of the last season, that's a mouthful, was released on April 2022. And the first part of the second half of the last season was released almost a year later on March 2023. And then, in Q3 and Q4 2023, was released the final part of the final season. And however, the manga ended in June 2021. So you can tell that, like, At some point, a lot of people were just like, let me just read the rest. Like, there's no point in waiting 3 years for the same. Like, and since this is one of the most popular manga anime series of all time, you may understand the difficulty of not talking about spoilers for the manga readers with anime watchers, and even the difficulty of anime watchers to choose between reading the final chapters of the manga or not. But, back to Game of Thrones. When this spoiler situation exploded, mainly because many fans of the book felt that the series didn't do justice and had to demonstrate the superiority of George R.R. Martin's original version, it became a very chaotic situation when fans just started to spoil things out of the spies, and you could even argue if they are really fans if they do that. And mind you, this was before the last 2 seasons. So with the last 2 seasons, I think everyone was unified under the same umbrella because of trauma, I guess. In practical terms, it became a war to either keep the mystery box, as J.J. Abrams defines it in his TED Talk, closed, with people trying to maintain its secrecy, versus those who are trying to open the box against all odds. Around the same time, Marvel did something similar with its infamous post-credits scenes. They aimed to leave you waiting for more and speculating at the end of each movie. Essentially, it is like a series, but one that you could only watch in the theater or on a very poor quality screener. Of course, with Marvel, also responsible for the popularization of the modern geek culture, it was more difficult to spoil anything because everyone knows they're superheroes, and Disney has made a considerable proactive effort to keep their film plots as far away from the comics as possible, claiming that they occur in a different universe. So the only way to spoil something is for someone to watch the movie before you do. And Disney, more specifically the Russo brothers with Endgame, did everything they could not only to navigate this culture of spoilers, but also to take advantage of it. They released trailers with scenes that were not in the final film, and they even went to extremes such as not letting all the actors know the full script, except for Robert Downey Jr., because he is Robert Downey Jr. In fact, because Tom Holland has a reputation for letting things slip in interviews and on social media, they had him act without even knowing what he was fighting against. That's the commitment they had to misdirect everyone and just not let everyone spoil anything. This leads to an extreme case where, to protect your experience, the only way to resolve the situation is to vaccinate yourself against spoilers. In other words, you have to watch the movie as quickly as possible so that no one can spoil it for you. This greatly benefits the companies which play with this concept and this unfounded fear. And while it is true that there are many inconsiderate people in the world, to put it mildly, on the internet, the act of censoring spoilers itself is a selfish act, depending on the circle you're in. That is, don't ask Twitter or X or YouTube not to talk about something that is obviously trending. It's impossible, and the world doesn't move at your pace. You put this together with the unfounded terror that we have for spoilers nowadays, and it leads to some truly complicated situations. In other words, yes, being told that so-and-so dies in such and such is a spoiler in itself, and arguably can alter the experience. But there are alarms over phrases that are much more common and innocuous in their nature, such as, this game has an open ending, or in a Mario game you can unlock Luigi. Trying to categorize these types of phrases as spoilers not only hampers the conversation, causing it to be abandoned, but also prevents analysis within the window of its release, which only benefits the owners of the product, not the consumers. It is logical to be upset if something like Gamescom or Comic-Con is spoiled. Isn't it an event of corporate announcements? Like, if I spoil to you the Game Awards, is that really a spoil? I mean, who benefits from everything being kept secret until the last moment, until that special moment, and being revealed in a very specific way. The owners of the properties, as a fan, you should be somewhat indifferent to that, perhaps even pleased that you are saving your time that you could use to do other things. But, of course, every person is different, and the internet is a world of worlds. It all depends on how it's perceived. Jim Rich, who was the executive editor of the NY Daily News in 2013, shares an anecdote in which the newspaper front page featured both the ending of Breaking Bad and the result of an American football game between the Giants and the Chiefs. His team advised against the headline because it spoiled Breaking Bad. To this, he responded that, following that logic, they shouldn't put the football game result on the front page either, because someone may have recorded it and haven't seen it yet. His team couldn't come up with a response, so the front page remained as it was. He was able to witness the reaction of someone, whom he didn't know personally, to his front page because they had been spoiled about Breaking Bad. But for him and many others, it still doesn't seem like a big deal after all. I mean, after all, how can he do his job without discussing what happens at the end of the season? Can you do the same to a sports journalist? How can you tell a sports journalist not to talk about the result of a game just because some people may not have seen it? More than a decade ago, in 2011, Nicholas Christenfeld, a professor at UC San Diego, and Jonathan D. Leavitt published a study showing that spoilers, in fact, do not ruin your experience, but rather enhance it. It all began when Christenfeld was helping his daughter with a school assignment, where she had to tell a story. Her story was a series of events. You wake up, do this, that, and then go to sleep. Christenfeld tried to explain that stories need plot arcs, challenges, etc. The well-known hero's journey. But while explaining, he paused to think about what makes a story enjoyable or not. For Christenfeld, fiction is a peculiar case where people invest almost entirely in a fictional world and how it unfolds. When he reached the same conclusion we have constructed in this video, that spoiling stories ruins them, he decided to put it to the test by spoiling stories. He did it with stories featuring ironic twists, mystery stories, and literary tales. The result was always the same. The group he spoiled the story for, before they read it, enjoyed it more than the group who encountered it by surprise. In the greatest irony, a study about spoiling things ended up having a surprising conclusion. The logic Christenfeld followed is the same. You always know in a romantic comedy that the couple will end up together and happy forever. And in a detective story, they will solve the crime. The fun lies in the how. Series like How I Met Your Mother precisely revolve around this idea. The series title is a spoiler. You want to see how it happens, not what happens. In fact, some argue that in their pursuit of surprising, the series lost momentum in the end. And actually, the ending is just very bad, and that's a video in itself. And like, I'm not going to discuss that because that ending, man, come on, that last season. I mean, really. Christenfeld and his team conducted another study where they interrupted people before they finished reading, thus spoiling the story right from the beginning. The conclusion remained the same. People enjoyed it more because they paid attention to all the details leading to that conclusion. In a way, eliminating the notion that it's more enjoyable the second time you see it. You know how it happens with certain games and movies like, I don't know, Fight Club or Nier Automata? Well, Nier Automata is a whole different kind of worms, but the second time you watch it, you enjoy it more because you know what we're talking about and you know what to expect and you see all the details. That's kind of the logic. Certainly, like with everything, a single study doesn't represent absolute truth. And everyone has the right to consume their media as they see fit. But it's fascinating to think about how this distorts our perception and consumption of content. Is a documentary about World War II less enjoyable knowing how it ended? Is it worthwhile for directors to change details of their story or film at the last minute because it leaked on the internet or because the theories were correct and we need to surprise Star Wars? Is really surprise valued more than the overall experience? Or is it the other way around? Is the growing culture of spoilers the result of a careful manipulation by studios and content owners to encourage the vaccine as quickly as possible and profit from it? Or is it, in fact, a widespread annoyance? Does it apply equally to sports results? Should you ask before discussing anything, just in case? The answers to these questions? We won't spoil them. Let me know down below what you think. Thank you very much for your time. This has been BitViews. Have a nice time. Bye.